I'm sorry that we're starting late, and I appreciate everybody that came out tonight, and you're going to have a lot of pizza and food after, especially probably for those high schoolers in the back. So thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedules to come here in order to try and educate yourselves around substance abuse in Winthrop and also the mental health struggles that many people are facing. I'm going to start with some numbers so that we can all understand the reason why we need to start talking honestly to ourselves and to each other. So 57 is the percentage of people reporting that substance use is the most concerning problem in Winthrop today. In 2013 and 2014, Mass General Hospital conducted a community health assessment in Winthrop. Through an abundance of surveys and data analysis, it was determined that more than half of the people that live in Winthrop are most concerned about substance abuse. Not cancer, more than pollution, and more than education. 42. These are the newly confirmed cases of hepatitis C in 2014. In 2009, there were 21 newly confirmed cases. So we've doubled our rates of hepatitis C in the last 5 years. Hepatitis C is transmitted blood to blood. There's no vaccine for it, unlike hepatitis B. It is primarily seen in the IV drug-using population, and although there's medication to treat hepatitis C, it still remains the leading cause of liver transplants. 25. This is the percentage of children under the age of 18 in the United States that live with an addicted parent. Next slide. Oops. No, that's okay. 13. This is the percentage of 6 to 12th grade students in Winthrop who reported that they had either attempted or considered suicide in the last 12 months when asked to answer the Youth Risk Behavior Survey this past May. The state average is 6%, so we're more than double suicidal ideation in our 6 to 12th grade population. 10. So this is the percentage of 6th through 12th grade students who report attempting suicide that required medical attention when asked in the Youth Risk Behavior Survey of May 2014. This is 5 times the state average of 2%. So 4. For every one person that's struggling with addiction, 4 others are directly affected. So that was kind of which brings us to the real purpose of tonight, that many of you sitting here have heard these statistics. I'm sure that this is new to nobody sitting in this room. You can just tell by the amount of overdoses and the amount of suicide attempts and the amount of wakes and funerals that have been held in this town recently. What we really need to get to is the why, so that we can stop the increases and to begin to see the decreases. And that will, unfortunately, there's not one single answer to it. What we need to understand is how it goes from it's no big deal to being dependence. This is a high-stakes game that people are engaging in, and unfortunately, too many people have paid the ultimate price. Depression, suicidal thoughts, and anxiety are affecting the very young to the very old. In addition, there is no age or socioeconomic status that is removed from substance abuse in Winthrop. The word recreation, when talking about drug use, has fallen by the wayside as the potency of drugs has increased over years and the rate at which addiction develops. I think it's fair to say that it would be very difficult to find someone in our town that hasn't been affected either directly or indirectly by substance use, substance abuse, or mental health issues, which is the reason why tonight is so important. Winthrop is a very interconnected community, so if we can start to have a conversation about hows and whys, we can start looking at decreasing these rates. I spent the day today at Newton South High School. They were doing a big focus on just mental health in general. And I shared the statistics specifically that we're 5 times the state average for suicide attempts requiring medical attention in our 6th through 12th graders. And they were shocked by it. Now, I was at Newton South because they had 3 suicides last year, and so they're doing a big initiative in the town. And so I went and I kind of observed everything that they're doing over there. And I was asking them, you know, what should we be doing? What can we be doing in Winthrop? And they said, don't be reactive like we have been. Please just try and be proactive and start talking about this now, or else you're going to be on the news like we were on the news, watching this kind of spiral out of control. And it can happen in any community that, you know, there's an increase in all of these things. It's just trying to take the advantage that we're all so interconnected that we should be able to sit back and start taking care of our neighbors and taking care of our kids and taking care of our elders. That being said, we're going to change it over to a movie right now that's being provided by the Partnership for Drug-Free Kids. And then my friend Paul's gonna talk with you guys.
So, just by show of hands, how many people do we have that are from the community, that work in the community, and also that are parents that are here tonight? Okay, good. And also, how many students or young people that are here? Greg, kicking or screaming, or do you want to? No, it's great. It's awesome. So just by way of introduction, my name is Paul Kuziak. I do not live in Winthrop. I actually live in Beverly, but I do have some connections, which I'll share a little bit later, with two sons who played sports and interacted with young people from Winthrop a number of years ago playing lacrosse and football. But I work in high tech. I do not work in the field of healthcare or law enforcement or education or anything like that. I'm really here as a parent, first and foremost. That's the hat I wear the most. But in my volunteer work, I've been 14 years with the Massachusetts Organization for Addiction Recovery MORE, which is partially sponsored by the Bureau of Substance Abuse Services and the Department of Public Health for the state of Massachusetts. And my role there has been as a parent and youth advocate. I've also volunteered for about 4 years with the Partnership for Drug-Free Kids, which is a national nonprofit based in New York City. You may have seen some of our ads on TV, Mind Your Meds. So with that, I'm going to share a quick video with you. It's about 10 minutes long, and then I'll share maybe for another 10 minutes.
As a parent, I think most of you are concerned about all these illegal drugs, the heroin, the marijuana, the meth, but you need to understand that the legal drugs are just as dangerous.
They're getting it from your neighbors, your friends. It's not hard at all.
If people are taking prescription drugs for non-medical purposes, they are not taking medicine. They're doing drugs.
It's easy to start, and it's painful to stop.
Prescription drugs are prescription for a reason. If you take too many of a prescription narcotic, you die.
Chelsea was very well liked by her friends and by her teachers.
Ronnie was going down to Tennessee State to be the next player to come out of Tennessee State.
Joey was extremely popular, just surrounded by friends.
Mark was an athletic, fit-looking kid.
Aaron enjoyed talking and debating with any and all people.
The prescription pain pill problem is a huge epidemic.
This is an epidemic.
This is an epidemic that is infiltrated our young people.
We never had a conversation with Joey about prescription drugs because we truly had no idea that there was any kind of recreational use going on.
How many guys know it's not using
The first time I started doing painkillers was when I was 17.
I would steal pills from my friend's mom. Her stepmom had a script for Vicodin. That was like heaven. I went in her room and stole Vicodin every day.
He would ask to use the bathroom in other people's homes, and he'd go in there and go in their medicine cabinets and steal prescription drugs.
These medications are available everywhere in every socioeconomic environment.
Ronnie was the starting halfback, one of our best players. He got several scholarship offers.
Ronnie was very popular in the neighborhood.
Ronnie was a neat freak, clean freak, always had his hair braided. When he got into the pill use, his mood changed. He changed, like, was that Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde?
Ronnie's appearance really deteriorated, and it was really unlike him.
I said, "Are you doing drugs?" And my son looked at me with these eyes of, "How could you even think of that, Mom?"
I was walking up to football practice. My coach was walking towards me. He just had this crazy look on his face. He goes, "You think they might have found your brother?" And I was like, to me, I was like goofing. I was like, I didn't know he went missing. So I was like making her like goofing off. And he was like, "No, Justin, seriously, they might have found his body." And I was like, "Wait a minute." I was "Whoa, what?" He's like, "Yeah, they discovered a body in an apartment in Telford."
I never thought my son would take prescription drugs without a prescription.
Parents often trip themselves up by asking a simple question: "Are you using drugs?" No. One has to be able to say, "I'm seeing some signs here that concern me."
He was a little bit more argumentative. We thought that was maybe hormones.
The person has what we call pinpoint pupils. Literally, the pupils look like a pinpoint.
She slept odd hours.
We didn't know why he was sleeping so late.
If I wasn't able to get high, then I didn't want to get out of bed because, the physical withdrawals.
We were missing tinfoil from the kitchen, missing spoons.
We'd find the pens that were cut in half.
Straws.
There were a lot of charges coming on the credit cards.
We thought that there was somebody stealing money out of her account.
That's probably a pretty good clue there's something going on. Joey was pretty upset with his roommates. They were spending all their money on medication. Had I known that the medications that they were taking were so dangerous, I would have told them, "You're not even going back to that place."
If you feel something's going on, you gotta investigate.
I thought it was just a phase. We partied when we were in high school, and it's just sort of a phase you go through as you grow, experience life, and you grow out of it. And I thought he was on that track.
Joey had been found and he was unconscious.
He had all these medications that he had just received from this doctor. More than likely, he crushed and snorted it. We're just being completely hit blindly by, a situation we had absolutely no understanding of and no notice of. And in the meantime, my husband's in the house. I'm out front in the front of the house, just, wondering what we're dealing with here. And so finally, Joe just came out and said, "He's gone."
I was downstairs getting ready for work. Cookie told me she couldn't get Mark up. Mark was powerful and had the nickname in some circles of Tank. I reminded her that what she had to do was get a cup of water and splash him with it and stay out of his way. And she told me it was different. We found a clear plastic bag of loose pills. I'm not sure if he even thought he was doing drugs, and I know that sounds crazy, but it's not like it was heroin or cocaine. We followed the ambulance to the hospital. A few minutes later, someone came in and told us that Mark was dead. We never thought that was a possibility.
I had no idea that kids were abusing medicine.
I came home one night, saw the basement light on, and went up to the window, and my son was crushing and snorting the pills.
We would find pills in the shoes, in the jackets that are hanging in the closet, in the pockets.
I found some pills hidden under his cushion.
They were in his socks. I never checked my kid's socks.
He took the light switch plate off and put them in there.
Look everywhere. Is it an invasion? No. You're doing the right thing as a parent.
I would question Chelsea, and she would always assure me that everything is fine and nothing's wrong.
Kids don't want to get in trouble, so they're going to tell you exactly what you want to hear.
There was always something down deep inside that said to me, something's wrong. You doubt yourself because you wonder if you're making a bigger deal out of something.
Maybe deep down my parents knew that I was high.
You can't always believe your child. Their lies get bigger when they're trying to hide substance abuse.
I knew her inside and out, and I remember Chelsea as the little girl that she used to be.
I looked at him and I only saw the most beautiful son in the world.
It was very difficult to think that she would be lying to me, which she was.
she was out using and abusing prescription drugs.
Long-acting agents like OxyContin are meant to be delivered in the body over a period of hours, if not a day. If they're chewed, crushed, and snorted, you get the entire dose at one blast, and if the body's not ready to accommodate that, you will stop breathing.
We needed to call the police. But what are their neighbors going to think?
Put all of that aside and focus on what's important, as difficult as it may be.
Families can't get too caught up in the idea that there may be an arrest, charge of my son or daughter. They could be in jail. They could be in the morgue.
The law saved my life. If my mom hadn't called the cops on me, I don't know where I would be right now.
It was the most difficult thing to do, to call the police on your own child. It was horrible. I have gone from putting importance on things like what college are you going to get into, to just celebrating the fact that she's alive today. She's doing very well. She's clean and sober. She's productive. She's sweet. And I have her back, and I'm thankful. And it's wonderful.
Aaron had spent the night at a friend's, and they found him blue and non-responsive. They took him to a local hospital.
He was using Vicodin, Valium, which we found out through his toxicology, what was in his blood system.
I witnessed him have 2 heart attacks in ICU. He had staph, he had pneumonia, he went through seizures. The doctor was explaining to us that he was going to die. We held his hands on each side, and we started crying, and he just laid there.
People use the medications in an abusive way, not knowing what the full consequences are, and somebody ends up here.
Within 24 hours, Aaron had opened his eyes.
Parents are the first line of defense in terms of prescription drug abuse.
You gotta sit your kids down. You just gotta tell them about the severity of the problem.
There's a number of steps that you can take.
Educate your child and yourself very early.
Anybody who feels that this can't happen to my child,
It could happen to your kid.
make sure that you don't have excess pills in your home.
Keep your medication locked up because you're never going to notice if something's gone.
What my mom does is she has these take-home pee tests that I gotta take. I want to keep my mom proud of me, and I don't want to let her down.
You need to have the conversation with them about drug and substance abuse, and you need to include prescription drugs and guide them so they're able to get through their high school years and into college and through their college years drug-free.
Have this conversation before it's too late to have this conversation.
Is that okay? I wish we had all night to sit down and go over so many things that I'd like to talk about, but I'm limited to 15 minutes, so I'm going to try to take my 12 plus years experience with my 2 sons and our family's journey from literally being at our wits' end to new beginnings that we have today. But first of all, I'm really happy to see the turnout tonight of mix of parents, people from the community, and the young people that are here. It's really important. I think that the biggest problem I see that we face is stigma and denial and accountability. And until, as communities, Beverly is no different than probably Winthrop or Worcester or any other city or town across Massachusetts and across this country, there's just too much denial. People thinking, no, not my son, not my daughter, not my school, not my community. Well, we're there. I mean, this is an epidemic. It's a plague in this country. It's probably the #1 threat to the national health care and safety of our nation. And I've talked to people at the Office of Drug Control Policy, at the White House and some other agencies, and they didn't disagree with me. So back to my connection between Beverly and Winthrop. Both my sons were 3-star athletes, played lacrosse, football, basketball, baseball, karate, you name it. And so some of those games, they play everything from Pop Water on here in Winthrop. Never in my wildest dreams did I imagine that just a few years later, my oldest son, when he was 19, would be leaving to go to treatment. And never in my wildest dreams did I imagine a few years later that my youngest son, who was 16 and a half, would follow in his footsteps and go into treatment, both struggling with OxyContin. I apologize for making some notes here, but I'm trying to take what is 14 years of experience, and probably in its worst of times, I can only describe it as our family's own private 9/11, spread over several years. But I wanted to give you a couple of statistics in addition to what Meredith shared. And this should drive home the point that no one is immune. 1 in 3 families are affected. 23 million people in America, 12 years of age and older, meet the criteria for substance use and dependence. That's almost 10% of the population. 10 million young people, 12 to 18 years old, are in current need of treatment for alcohol and drug abuse. Yet, only 10% of those are getting help. And prescription meds, as I talked about here in this film, those are the most commonly abused drugs now of 12 to 13-year-olds. And the science and the evidence is telling us that 90% of all adults with a substance use disorder started using as teenagers. So again, no community, family, or individual is immune. I'd like to ask you to just close your eyes for 1 second, probably 30 seconds, and just listen to these questions. Think about stigma. Think about your friends and family, loved ones, co-workers, schoolmates. You suddenly learned that your loved one is addicted to drugs and alcohol. What would you do? How would you feel? Where would you go for help? How would you want your loved one to be treated? And how would you want your family to be treated? Now you can open your eyes. I say that because, again, I'll go back to stigma. You'll hear me say stigma, denial, and accountability a couple of times tonight, is that we know prevention can work, and we know treatment can work, and we know people can get well. But because of stigma, very few people reach out for the help that they need. People don't talk about it. This auditorium should be packed, and it's not. We need more courageous community leaders to step forward, like those who organized this evening. More social workers in the school systems helping our kids and nurses. If it wasn't for the school nurse and the social worker in Beverly when my youngest son was there, they watched him like a hawk. He very well could have died in that school. They were lifesavers for him. So I'd just like everybody to know here that if substance use is impacting you, if you have someone that's in crisis right now, or a friend or someone you're concerned about, just know that there are individuals and there are organizations that would help you in a heartbeat if just given a chance. So move past denial, move past stigma, don't let that get in the way. There's absolutely no shame in asking for help. The only shame is not asking for it. In the spirit of what Meredith said about being proactive rather than reactive, I want to share a couple of resources. And the first one is really geared towards education and prevention. All you really have to remember is drugfree.org. That's it. Everything that I'm going to be sharing with you until I get to the next point is just www.drugfree.org. So the Partnership for Drug-Free Kids has been around for about 25 years. It's the largest nonprofit in the country that's geared towards reducing teen substance use and helping parents and primary caregivers whose kids struggle. We get about 4 to 4.5 million unique hits, visitors to our website every year. And there's all kinds of really helpful information about how to have age-appropriate conversations with your kids. The entire website is very social, very easy to search. Everything there is science and evidence-based, but the partnership really values the input of parents that are part of their network, those of us who volunteer there, because they want to make sure that they're not like the Tin Man. You have all this cool science, but you know, they want to make sure they have a heart. They want to make sure that it's reaching the right audiences the way they intended it. There's also information in both English and Spanish. There's more information in Spanish on the Partnership's website than any other website of its kind for what I'm told in this country, and that includes the federal government's SAMHSA and some of their other sites as well. Just to give you an example of some of the projects that they have that are high priorities, one is the Medicine Abuse Project called Mind Your Meds, and you've probably seen our ads on television. So it's basically how to safeguard them. And there's another project called Prescription Meds to Heroin, a brand new one that we just announced called the Marijuana Talk Project. There's Stories of Hope. And lastly, there's a parent helpline, 1-855-DRUG-FREE, where a parent who might be in crisis or has concerns, suspects a young person might be using, can call, they'll talk to a trained clinician, and they'll offer them some guidance on resources and so forth. They also will refer them, if the parent is interested and if there's the right fit, to a national parent support network of parents who have been trained to help them. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. Lastly, for the community, there's some news feeds called Join Together. That's also under the Partnership for Drug-Free Kids. It's all the latest trending news and research on addiction and substance use. And for teens, normally I wouldn't really talk about this, but some of you may be aware of the influence. I hope you do, but it's not something I kind of feel bad when I'm mentioning as a parent, because it really should just be peer-to-peer. That should just kind of happen organically in the community. But it's all about helping kids understand making good, life choices. And right now, I think there's about 3.5 million Facebook followers there. As far as treatment and recovery, I know that there's people here tonight from a number of organizations. There is a couple that I wanted to share with you. One, again, is the Massachusetts Organization for Addiction Recovery. So in addition to drugfree.org, if you just Google MORE, M-O-A-R, it'll pop up. And there's a MORE mini resource guide that has information about everything from detoxes to 5-day partial and hospital programs, 30-day residential, 90-day extended care, sober high schools, how to deal with quarries, Narcan training, on and on and on. There's a ton of information there. In addition to MORE, There are a number of support groups. We're really fortunate here in Massachusetts to have so many. A lot of you are probably familiar with some of the obvious ones that have been around a long time. For people finding their path to recovery, there's AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, and Narcotics Anonymous, NA. But there's also something that's relatively new, and we're fortunate to have these groups in Massachusetts. It's called Smart Recovery. For family members, in addition to Al-Anon, we have Families Anonymous, we have Learn to Cope. There's actually some folks here tonight from the Salem chapter. Learn to Cope has 17 groups now across Massachusetts. And that's a group that you can go and not only be welcome if you're in crisis, you'll immediately know that you're not alone, and there's help and there's hope, but there's an educational component. There's training on Narcan, they'll have guest speakers, there is crosstalk, that can happen in those types of meetings. And the last thing I wanted to share, and it's a favorite book of mine, and this ties back into the partnership. There's a book called Beyond Addiction, A Family Guide Beyond Addiction, How Science and Kindness Help People Change. And it is something that is relatively new, and it's not used yet in a lot of treatment centers, but it would be totally complementary for any treatment center or individual counseling or any of the support groups that I mentioned. But it's the total opposite of tough love, the total opposite of detaching. 30, 40 years of recent science and evidence shows that by staying engaged and by being supportive and focusing on the positive, you can help someone, change and want to seek help. And we have, I've been to New York a couple of times. We've been trained by several PhD level clinicians, Cindy Wilkins and Dr. Jeff Foote. And they're working with a partnership and training network of parents and a network of clinicians from around the country that are part of our National Parent Support Network. And the results that we've been seeing is that at a minimum, the families, all of the family members are much calmer. There's not all the drama and that you would typically see, without this. So I'll cut this, short, and if I'd be happy to answer any questions during the breakout session that we have a little later. But thank you very much, everyone, for showing up and for listening to all of this. And I hope some of it's value and can help some friends that you know.
Yeah. So the next person we have is Miriam Irvin. She's from North Suffolk Mental Health. She's the Assistant Director of Addiction Services. Did I say that right? All right. I also want to introduce my colleague, Mike Leach. She's here from the Institute for Health and Recovery. We have sort of a roadshow we do for trainings. And I want to also say thanks to Paul, because that video was really remarkably effective in getting the point across. And everything that he says resonates with me, and is half of what I was going to say, so done. The other half is going to be a lot of self-education about brain science around this, and Paul's talking about the stigma portion of it. And I think part of kicking the stigma is understanding that this is a disease of the brain, legitimately. Research and everything else shows us that. But also, everything that if you are a loved one of an addict, alcoholic, drug abuser, whatever it is, you know that the behaviors you see, you just can't make sense of. And it's because the brain is really physiologically affected by this disease and really controls behavior in a way that is not natural, right? So this is what we understand now that we might not have before, and it helps us to really be a lot more compassionate, right, as overall, as a society, as a community, to people who are in need of treatment. And as Paul said, prevention works and treatment works. These are the things that work. Not talking about it and not doing anything about it is what we know doesn't work, categorically, right? A lot of what I talk to people about is, I talk to parents and I talk to youth about how important it is to get treatment and to work on prevention early on. So talk about it early on. Don't wait. Because if you wait, you're waiting for someone else to talk about it with them. And it will be someone else who talks about it with them. And 9 times out of 10, if you're talking about peers, it's going to be peers talking to each other about it, which is great that they talk to each other, but they're not always talking about the information that's factual and correct, you know? So that's a longer story longer. But I'm going to start out. Mike's actually going to do this slide because he's more well-informed. There he goes.
Hi, folks. How you doing? Are you guys in the same town back there? You're pretty far away. Can you hear okay? Yeah. Good. Very good. So, can somebody tell me what we're looking at here? Any ideas? Close? What did you say?
Rain activity.
Rain activity. That's pretty close. That's very close. All right, there you go. So what we're looking at these are cross sections of the neocortex, part of the brain, of a group of monkeys. There are actually 2 groups. One group that is a control group, that's normal brain, and the other monkeys are from a different group. These monkeys were given ecstasy for 4 days, twice a day. And then later they died, and some of the slides are taken from the brains. But the slide over here, the first one you come to, this is the control group. This is what that purple stuff you see is a neurotransmitter called serotonin. The reason that folks did this experiment is they knew that folks who took ecstasy, MDMA, had a tendency to become very depressed once the effects of the ecstasy wore off. And over time, this depression, became major depression. So they were wondering if it had anything to do with serotonin levels in the brain. So what they did is they did this experiment on a group of monkeys. So they gave them ecstasy twice a day for 4 days, then they stopped. So what you see in the second slide is the serotonin after 2 weeks. 2 weeks after they stopped. Okay, so it's probably 90% gone. And finally, the last slide, 7 years later, the serotonin has not come back to anywhere close to the same level it was initially. So what does this mean? The point of this is simply that drugs change brain chemistry. Now, these aren't humans, they're other primates, they're monkeys. But we can speculate that if we were to do this with humans, it would look very similar. Now, we're talking about substance use, and we're talking about what has come to be called addiction or substance dependence. We're talking about a continuum that starts with experimental use, and then it doesn't progress far from there. It's a voluntary behavior. There aren't necessarily adverse consequences when drug experimentation starts, but all drug addicts pass through this phase. So, as the continuum progresses, in cases where folks go from experimental drug use to addiction, what you start seeing is a lot of loss of control over the drug-taking behavior. You start seeing the development of this notion of tolerance, which is, you need more of the substance to get you high. You spend more time doing drug-seeking behavior. Other things that you used to like to do, maybe you used to like to play sports, or you used to like to do other things in the community. You start to do less of those because you're spending more and more time thinking about and figuring out how you can get drugs to feed your habit. And so eventually, when you get to the farthest stage of addiction, you realize that whatever's going on here has you completely in its control. And so you continue in spite of occupational problems, job problems, legal problems, money problems, problems with family, just about every part of your life. So when you're talking about addiction and dependence, addiction involves compulsion. What starts out as voluntary doesn't end up as voluntary. Dependence is actually a physiological thing that happens. People can become dependent upon substances without necessarily becoming addicted. If people are being treated for, let's say, late-stage cancer, and they're being treated with opioid medication, they may or may not develop addiction as a result. But they will develop dependence, which means when they stop taking the medication, they will go into withdrawal. And the addiction and dependence involve different parts of the brain, different pathways. We'll touch on that really briefly, but I won't spend a lot of time on that. And addicts are usually dependent, but dependence doesn't necessarily involve addiction. You need more of the substance to get you high. You spend more time doing drug-seeking behavior. Other things that you used to like to do, maybe you used to like to play sports, or you used to like to do other things in the community. You start to do less of those because you're spending more and more time thinking about and figuring out how you can get drugs to feed your habit. And so eventually, when you get to the farthest stage of addiction, you realize that whatever's going on here has you completely in its control. And so you continue in spite of occupational problems, job problems, legal problems, money problems, problems with family, just about every part of your life. So when you're talking about addiction and dependence, addiction involves compulsion. What starts out as voluntary doesn't end up as voluntary. Dependence is actually a physiological thing that happens. People can become dependent upon substances without necessarily becoming addicted. If people are being treated for, let's say, late-stage cancer, and they're being treated with opioid medication, they may or may not develop addiction as a result. But they will develop dependence, which means when they stop taking the medication, they will go into withdrawal. And the addiction and dependence involve different parts of the brain, different pathways. We'll touch on that really briefly, but I won't spend a lot of time on that. And addicts are usually dependent, but dependence doesn't necessarily involve addiction. So, one of the things that we're going to talk about is the disease model of substance use disorders. And that's the notion that we treat substance use disorders as a disease, like other chronic diseases. And I think Miriam will talk about this one.
More of the same of what Mike's mentioning around some of the behaviors that you see, and that it's chronic, right? Once you start using it, it becomes an addiction, it becomes a chronic disease. And then as well, the behaviors are compulsive that you see, right? There doesn't seem to be a rhyme or reason that's rational around it, but it's compulsive based on the brain chemistry that's going on. So it's similar to a disease that's like, it could be asthma, right? An asthma disease that not so much stigma around asthma, the way there is with addiction, right? But similar to asthma, it's diagnosable, so you have the symptoms and you know what it is, and you can diagnose and you can treat it because it's diagnosable. It is chronic, and it's scientifically, research shows that it's a disease of the brain. So we know that when you're dealing with different parts of the brain, you know what it is that the drug is affecting. So part of what Mike was talking about is this is the serotonin levels, this is the decrease in it, and this is actually the damage that's done, the permanent damage that's done to your brain. So some of the parents in the movie were talking about the behaviors that they saw that were just really, it seemed really strange at first, and then we didn't know stuff was going missing, and they were sleeping all the time. You see the mood start to change. I mean, this is stuff that's actually going on in the brain, and it's stuff that's actually affecting mental health too. And so we'll talk also a little bit about what you start to see with mental health disorder is that they kind of overlap. And then you also see that people self-medicate with mental health disorders, so depression, anxiety, and the opiates and the prescription medication is really tough because then you've got the medical, your prescribed medication, right, because you're in pain, and then that leads to the addiction. That's something that we struggle with because that medical model is that's okay for you to take medication if you're in pain for a broken bone or whatever it is that is chronically pain. But it's not okay once the addiction starts. That's when the secrets start, right? So that's when you stop telling people maybe that you're using it because you're high now and getting high off it and you're not using it for the broken leg pain anymore. So that's a really tough dynamic that occurs. And a lot of people hide getting high on prescription medication because of that. So a lot of people hide the fact that they're getting high at all because of the stigma involved and what happens next. So it keeps people from getting treatment. It is not, so if you're using the disease model, you can stop seeing it as a moral issue. It's not a moral issue. It's not a socioeconomic issue, which is mentioned in the movie. It is not, it doesn't discriminate. Addiction doesn't discriminate. We all have brains. And generally speaking, overall, our brains all work the same way. So it keeps us from blaming people when that's the case, It's not because you're less educated. It's not because you want to be getting high necessarily, right? It's because you really have a disease of the brain. A lot of times the relapse part of it is difficult for people to, family and loved ones to understand. When people start using again, that's the chronic part of the disease, right? And when we relapse as a treatment provider ourselves, like in our addiction program, we see that relapse is part of the treatment. What the relapse can indicate to us is what's really going on in the dynamics of the thoughts and the behaviors and how they connect and how we can help, better help. So relapse is not a reason to start thinking that someone is, you can't help them, they can't be helped. It's part of the disease, it's part of how the brain works. So. I think that one of the best parts of what being a treatment provider for me is that I do see that it really works. And then as well, it's black and white. You know that this disease will get worse if not treated. And as soon as someone starts to get sober and gets treatment, you see progress immediately. It's a beautiful thing. As soon as someone stops using the drug, their body and their mind and their soul starts to heal. So, Mike and I talk to people about what the continuum of care is, what's available to people for treatment. And there's everything from, the outpatient treatment that I do and that my staff does with kids in the community that's awesome because it really goes out and reaches them in the community and replaces the drug use with activities that are fun or that really can be something to replace the drug use, not just talking to them about how they shouldn't use. And then as well, there's residential, there's detox and stabilization. So there's ways that people can be in different levels of treatment that really help them for exactly where they are in their addiction at the time. And then as well, if you need to keep sort of, treatment is something that's ongoing. So if you need to stay in treatment, you need to step down to another level of treatment, and you need to go back and sort of go back into treatment, and treatment's always there. It's something that I know if anyone's a loved one or a parent or a loved one of an addict, they know that when treatment started is probably when things started to get better. When you really just could admit to everyone that something's going on and we need to get them treatment. And now we can start talking about it, we can start having support groups about it, we can have someone who can start doing family therapy around it. So I'm a huge advocate of this treatment. I think that one of the things that I like about the movie is that we've got sort of, the community's all coming together to make obviously because this is a problem in Winthrop. It's not just Winthrop though. It's the entire area. And in my program, we just recently had a 17-and-a-half-year-old who died of a fatal drug overdose over the weekend. So that was extremely impactful for the community, for the kids in treatment, that were in treatment with this individual. There's really not words to express how processing that in treatment goes or in the community, but there's a lot of that going on. it was really sad for me to hear how when I mentioned the funeral home for the wake for this individual, that everyone knew exactly where I was talking about. The kids knew what I was talking about because they had gone to wakes there for the same reason over the past 6 months. That's really sad, and it's really scary to me and to all of us. It's really important because of that the community comes together about it, that people not just talk about it, but that they're open to talking about it with people who really need to talk about it. You don't shut down the conversation because of feeling guilty or shameful or just not wanting, the denial that I was talking about. And so I don't know if we have time to really talk about the specifics of the neuroscience of addiction. I think what I wanted to focus on more was really the human interest part of it, and the really coming together as a community. I'm really grateful that Winthrop High School and the Winthrop community has a whole health and wellness week, this week, a whole curriculum that they've created for the kids and for the community to come together and talk about these issues that don't for the rest of the year really get focused on. So thank you so much everyone for coming out, and thank you for letting me be a part of this, Meredith and everyone. And that's all I have today. But I love that they take this set up for all this information we're talking about. Just pick up the pamphlets.
Hi, folks. In the interest of time, because we're running out of time, and because this is a community event, we do want to have folks be able to talk together, to interact, and look at what's out there in the way of brochures and information. But I do want to, this is a particularly important point that I want to emphasize. Adults and adolescents are different, and they're different in ways that are really, really significant when we're talking about substance use. There is a reward system in the midbrain, in the limbic system, that is fully developed and very sensitive when you're an adolescent. It's fully developed in some ways more so than the adult brain. Unfortunately, there's this other part of the brain called the cortex, and especially the prefrontal cortex that kind of weighs pros and cons of things, makes decisions, tries to figure out what's the best choice to make. That part is not fully developed. In fact, doesn't completely connect with the rest of the brain until the mid-20s. So you have a real problem. On the one hand, you have a reward system that's really fully developed and capable of being influenced by substances. On the other hand, you don't have the decision-making capacity to really resist and make valid choices about it. This is why it's so critical that kids not start using substances as adolescents. The other thing is that obviously physical changes to the brain are more long-lasting. These things make it the case that folks who start using them are much more prone to addiction in later life, like twice as prone as the general population. About 60% to 80% of the kids that we see in the treatment system have co-occurring disorders. That means that they've experienced significant trauma in their lives. It means that they have anxiety. It means they may have depression. They may be suffering from being bullied at school. There may be a whole variety of things that result in their taking medication, as Miriam said, to self-medicate in most cases. Most adolescents don't seek treatment voluntarily, unfortunately. I mean, it's a fact. And the result is that only 1 in 10 kids, as Paul mentioned, who actually is in need of treatment actually receives it. So that's really all I have for tonight. And I really thanks so much for coming out. And please, definitely enjoy each other's company and really ask questions. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. There's down in the cafeteria, we have some tables set up with some of the resources that are here, not just the speakers that we have. We also have folks here from East Boston Drug Court, CASA, Learn to Cope, East Boston Neighborhood Health Center, there's the Suboxone Clinic. I'm sorry if I'm missing anybody. The wellness committee that is kind of put on this week at the high school. There's some people down there, so there's some food down there. Kind of mingle, have some water, have some cookies, have some pizza, ask some questions, get some answers.
Now it doesn't matter where you say you've been, no. It doesn't matter what you've done. Oh, no, no. Cause the same color blood is running through my veins. Is the color that sustains another one. I know that you might have had a hard time, yeah. And maybe you thought of giving in. But don't never give in. Cause no matter where you stand, it's not too much to lend my hand. Yeah, my neighbor. Yeah, my brother. Yes, you're my friend. You're my friend. My friend. You're my friend. My friend. Yes, you are. Well, I know that you might get a little lonely sometime, yeah. You know I've been down that road before. Oh, yes, I have. And when my so-called friends were taking each other in, I couldn't even make it through the door. So why don't you come on in? Take a load off your mind. And I dare you, yeah, to wear the shoes. All right. I know, no. No matter where you stand, it's not too much to lend my hand. Cause you're my neighbor. You're my brother. Show up. You're my friend. My friend. My friend. You're my friend. My friend. Yes, you are. Let me tell you. To do, y'all. I'm throwing out that lifeline. Trying to spread, just trying to spread some sunshine. Got a whole lot of love for mankind. So why don't you call me sometime and I'll be by your side. Hold on a minute. Make sure you don't forget. I'll be there when you call me. Just say I'll be there when you call me. No matter where you stand, it's not too much to lend my hand. You're my neighbor. You're my brother. Yes, you're my friend. Down to the end, I'm throwing out the lifeline. Trying to spread some sunshine. You're my friend. You're my friend. Why don't you call me sister? Call me brother. All you do is call and I will be there in my friend. You're my friend. You'll never find a better out. Come on in. Take a load off your mind. You'll never find a better friend. You'll never find. Yeah, my friend. Just call me. My friend. Any time of day. I'll be right there. You'll never find a better. You'll never find a better friend. My friend. Whoa, you'll never find a better friend. You'll never find a better.